Hello, Julian. Welcome.
Hello, Nagui. It's good to see you as always.
Yeah, look, it's great. Wow, it's been quite a while since I've done some podcasts, so it's actually nice to get back to these. And you and I met on one of these podcasts. And gosh, time flies. Was it 3 years ago?
That's correct. And wasn't that an amazing way to learn about your work and learn about me in that moment? No pre-rehearsal or et cetera. But it's kind of like modeling what we're going to talk about today. We don't always get to rehearse our interactions with people. So it's
Yeah,
good to see you. Yes.
it was amazing, actually. At that time, I was just reaching out to people and I didn't know where that was going to go. So we've met some amazing people and still connected, which is wonderful. So let's do some quick introductions because, I don't want to botch it up. All right, let's be honest here. The reality is we've been working together for a period of time. We've enjoyed lots of conversations, and the catalyst behind this was we need to share some of these conversations, right? And so,
Correct.
without further ado, please tell people watching, listening, a little bit about yourself, how you got to here, I guess. Hmm.
Okay. Well, catalyst is one of my popular words at the moment because years ago I got the label of communication catalyst because what I do is I show people how to use their voice without raising their voice in their workplace as well as in their interpersonal relationships. And what that does is I use humor and storytelling and teaching people how to use the act of conversation to build stronger connections, more productive relationships. And how that work shows up is I've become an author and written a couple of books. I do workshops where I get people to talk and look at each other and not put their heads down in their phone, and then keynotes. So it has expanded over time, but it's a lot of fun, and it's everything is connected with one thing: is the power of using our voice, using our story to learn about ourselves, and more importantly, about each other.
Yeah, congratulations. It's been amazing. I've seen a lot of the activity that you've been involved with. You've been a great speaker in many environments, in HR and so forth. And those books that you've written. Tell us a little bit about the book, yeah, and the follow up.
Well, the first book started its life as a complaint, and then it became a speech about had we had turned into a heads down, living in a bubble species because we no longer listened. And we used our phones, which are fantastic devices when we're using it correctly, but we also wrote a lot of assumptions in our head when we were responding to texts and emails and sometimes not paying attention to what we're reading. And then a couple of years back, by luck, I happened to be invited to a rather large keynote address, which I didn't have all the details when I said yes. I thought, oh, 200 people are going to be in the room. I'll walk around and I'll talk to them. And then a colleague of mine who was presenting there said, oh, no, it's going to be on a big stage, a super big stage with jumbotron screens behind me, and there's 500 people in the audience, and most of them are senior executives. And good luck to you. So then that spurned the birth or the use of what I've now labeled my inner Queen's girl voice. Because when I was having a rather animated inner dialogue about what was I going to say to these people, they're going to see this short little woman on the stage and go, why is she here? Why should I listen to her? My inner Queen's girl just said, look, they're going to hear your accent, but you're going to have to keep it authentic and just show up as you are. So that speech became a humorous routine. Everyone did look up and everyone did talk to each other at the end. And then a year or two later, a book came about. And then after COVID, I realized we still hadn't learned all we need to do. And I have one book with a workbook. So you can read a book, think it's interesting, and fun, and then you don't know what to do afterwards. So I give you an opportunity to learn some basic things that you
Right.
can keep with you that psychologists and
Mhm.
scientists, yourself included, have confirmed it's all true. We all
Mm.
do the same silly things and we all get in trouble and we need to get better.
And that's a great idea, following up with the workbook, because I know we have libraries of books that we've read, and I've forgotten most of what I've read. That when you have a workbook, and having some reminders, it's almost like that listening thing that we're talking about today. It's really getting them focused again, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so, and that's really our topic today is squirrel, right?
But
um,
it's funny that you're saying about the listening because in the book, what I wrote, when I did a workbook, I said, how many boring things have we read at work or something's giving us instructions? So in the workbook, I keep my inner Queen's girl voice. So when you're ready to turn a page, I'm kind of like yelling at you on the page saying, what do you mean? You're not done. You haven't done enough. So I'm having some fun with
oh,
the internal dialogue that we all have when we're like, I'm good. No, you're not. So,
yeah, yeah,
pay
yeah. Did you
attention. So.
did you skip the last two pages?
Yes, see there, you must have read ahead. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I'm the type of person that will actually skip through. I want to know what's coming before I actually start executing. But that's great, and people learn in different ways too. So, you're using that listening skill. If I can just project what I'm hearing here a little bit, to focus them through the book and through that interaction and the fun, the engagement, and so forth. So tell me a little bit more about the whole listening thing, because I think you and I have some interesting perspectives, and they're also different, but they collaborate. As we found out in our Zoom call last week, right?
Hmm.
And that was one of the triggers for this was. This is a great topic. Let's share it with other people. So tell us
Well,
more about it. Yeah.
when I dial back all the interactions I've ever had with clients or customers in different work settings, when I'm giving trainings and workshops and I'm talking to people at events, when you dial everything down that triggered their challenges, 99% of the time, it's because somebody failed to listen, failed to understand, and then failed to take appropriate action. They worked on their assumption, they worked on all the noise in their head. So that was at the root of
Mm.
everything. And the more we move forward, we have so much more technological things that we're offering each other to use. The more it gets more complicated, and the more we have to emphasize that the human interaction is as important a skill to practice than any other technological skill, particularly in the world of AI that everyone's chatting about. You can't relegate your brain to saying it's going to solve your problems. Your critical thinking, your curiosity, and your innate intelligence has to be part of it. So in Queens, I use the analogy, the Learned It in Queens books, etc. I talk about the fact that C was never the ideal grade for me, at least at home. A was the goal. You had to get A's at the very least. Well, I believe in the power of the C, because if you use that as a thought prompt when you're speaking to somebody, you are looking at getting context, showing curiosity, collaborating versus talking
Mm.
at you and waiting for you to finish talking so I could begin again. So it's a much more ebb and flow of a conversation. So I use my metaphors basically to disrupt some tightly held concepts and get people to laugh and think, because nobody learns when they're getting admonished. I think we're much more receptive to learning and listening if we feel the person is truly listening to us and giving us the gift of their attention and time. That means looking up like we're doing now, even though we're divided by, I think, a couple thousand miles or so, and giving you the full on focus of our energy. And you
Mm,
can feel it. You can feel it.
yeah. And it's body language. It's, as you said, curiosity. It's not just, we keep throwing around the active listening or
Mm,
be present. But do we really actually practice that? And, with the neuroscience side of things and the stuff that we do as well with acumesh and behavior intelligence and
mhm.
all of that, we also recognize that people are different and there are certain personalities that, or certain traits, neural programs. I won't go into the neuroscience too much, but because we are different types of people, some have the natural gift of curiosity, right?
Mhm.
And is that an important part of the listening aspect, or is there more that you think about when you talk about that? You're the expert, so I'm going to let you talk to me.
Well, thank you. That's a generous title to give me. Yes, to your question, because we have a committee in our head of all the experience. We're our own little universes roaming the planet. We have all our family upbringing, all the messages we've had, the neighborhoods we grew up, the languages we spoke. So we are walking around as our own little universe, and we think a word or two means the same as you think it is, coming from your learning and education and perspective. So we always have to test our theories. We always have to challenge it in a curious way and in an interested way. And one of the expressions I coined years ago was story tourism, because when we travel, whether we're going local or something, we see that new environment in a fresh eye. How do they grow their crops? What are they growing? What are they wearing? What are they eating? But we're also looking at ourselves objectively. We start to see how we're interacting in that area. So I think when we use stories and take a pause to pay attention and do more listening than talking, that actually frees us up for that person to
Mm,
have some empathy and trust, because they feel the respect. And I've been amazed, because I used to think, oh, how can you coach on Zoom? How can you entertain and have a speech on Zoom? You're going to lose the audience connection. And one way or two, yes, because you don't have that energy that's in the room. However, people can buy into it, because I have many coaching situations where all I did was listen, asked a few words, and it changed the interaction of what that person chose to share, because they sensed that they were being heard and they could take a little bit more of a risk and give me less of their party line than they normally would about their
mm,
experience in their work. So less on the left brain, more on the whole brain. And that's what made a difference. And then be able to free themselves to pay attention to how they were operating in a situation.
mm. Interesting, because as you're talking and explaining all of that, I'm obviously also doing the squirrel things. We're all human. We're going to do that, right? And the skill is to bring yourself back, right? Uh,
Correct. And it's not bad, because storytelling, or metaphors, which is story's cousin, does exactly that. It puts the listener in the story with you. And it's like almost like those old vintage movies where it was half screen, you had two characters talking offline. So you're running videotapes,
mhm.
but you're still coming back, and your brain is firing. The reason you can do that, and I'm telling to the expert, who am I talking for? The both sides of your brain is fired up, and they have done brain scans of storytelling and how people are
Mm,
mirroring the motion. That's why we love movies. That's why we watch TV, because we think we're the character, or we're in there, or we're relating to, and we're crying and, holding onto the chair sometimes, depending what we're watching. So you have described very naturally
mm.
what most of us do,
Yeah,
but we have
yeah,
to pause. and listen.
And I'm almost tempted to flip it on the other side. It's also
Mm,
up to the speaker
mhm.
just as much as the listener to make sure that they pay attention to the cues within their audience. And I'm going to segue, sorry.
Absolutely, because look at all the disruption in the workplace lately. After COVID, there's been a call to back to work in the office, so new ways of configuring how you're experiencing the workday. So that has created some communication challenges. There's been massive layoffs in many companies as they readjusted their manpower for cultural, economic, and a host of different reasons.
Yeah.
So think about all the leaders out there, all the managers who are now going in and telling their team, "You mean a lot to me. You're the best and the best." Well, tell me that there's not another dialogue going inside the head of all your listeners saying, "Yeah, what about Sam, who you
Mhm.
said bye, who was a top performer who left last week, and all the other ones? What does this mean for me?" So when we're going into a room, we need to also be cognizant that there's inner dialogues going on, and maybe those pauses or that silence we're receiving is because people have either cognitive dissonance, they're debating, they're not sure if they can take a risk to talk and really say what's on their mind. So there's a huge amount of things. And then what a lot of leaders are guilty of when we've talked about this here and then in other conferences is by time the information gets fed down, we're going to make a change, we're going to do this great thing, people forget that it's new to the person receiving it. And we have to be very artful of repeating and repeating and repeating and doing something live. And it doesn't also means taking feedback, taking input in safe ways or however you can do that, and showing some action afterwards.
Mm.
Um, and I can give you a small achievable answer. Surveys are everyone's favorite in a company. You know, it's like you have a department, they send out a survey. The company sends out the survey, HR sends it. If you're not prepared to do it, organizational climate survey without having some good news or an action on the back that takes less than 5 or 6 months, you're losing some of your traction because people want to see proof that you heard them, saw them, and respected. Whether it's like this, I'm acknowledging what you're sharing, saying that's true and that's wise, or an actionable item that they can point to. That shows more listening than anything.
Mm.
They've
Yeah.
experienced something getting done. So that is where the biggest complaint is with most people. Yeah, we had a chat, but what happened? Nothing. They went away. And that was the last I saw them. There was all my ideas and there's all the things I input. And I'm saying that because I was that person on the other side of the fence, giving all those surveys and then realized, yeah, it's a little bit of a gap
Yeah.
between the resistance to actually doing them after a while.
And are surveys still working, or have we gotten to the point where there's been so many surveys done that people are starting, as you say, when you don't act on it, when you don't use it the right way, or when you have people that are worried about their job or saying the wrong thing, that someone will get fired, and all of that cultural stuff.
I think there is. Now, I don't want to just give an opinion and not back it up with facts. So I think if any of your listeners are out there or any one of our community has research and data, but here's a theory, and I want to see if it's true. I suspect we also may have survey fatigue, and it has nothing to do with our workplace because we cannot have a single interaction in our lives from post office to calling in an order someplace where somebody's always asking us to take a survey. So it's not just in our community, it's in every part of our life. I'm going to give my husband a survey when I go home tonight. And for the heck of it, see if he responds and answers in a timely fashion with the answers I need. Why not? Everybody else is giving me one. I must have give him one. So, okay.
Well, I think there's also another layer that maybe we don't pay too much attention to, and that's the nonverbal cues, right? Okay. You can tell when someone is not happy. You can tell when someone's not paying attention. You can tell when someone is disengaged. And that's another form of listening, isn't it? Right? It's paying attention to the cues that are coming back, right?
However,
okay,
we still need to confirm our theory. Now, lucky for us, I'm fresh off doing in-person workshops where I could physically see and feel the energy of people. One gentleman was not bored. He was in extreme pain because he was having an issue sitting. He had a back problem and everything. So it wasn't the content, it was his body was kind of screaming at him. Just as recently as yesterday, I had somebody in a workshop, and his body language changed, not because he wasn't connecting to the topic. It was he had an emotional reaction to a memory he had about how he was accused wrongly of a situation and wanted to show greater context to an example that I was using and debate something I had shared a little bit. So his goal was to be heard. So he up to that point, he was kind of a tall, big guy leaning against the wall, but then he rearranged his whole self to say, pay attention. And then afterwards, I found he was one of the leaders in the Oscar. We had purposely not shared titles in this group to kind of give me an unbiased view of who was in the room. So very interesting learning about what we're doing and thinking.
So we jump to conclusions on some of those things. And actually, you just remind me, one of my first large room presentations, the person in the front of the room, right in front of me, was sitting there with his eyes closed, and I thought he was sleeping, but he was auditory, and his questions were coming out firing. A few seconds later, he was 100% engaged, right? So we jumped to those conclusions about that response. So if we don't ask questions and we don't explore those feedbacks, we reach the wrong conclusion. And again, that's a form of listening, isn't it?
Yeah, and you remind me of a talk, one of my first talks. It was a big room, and I had a rapport with one person in the room about, looking down, keeping it. And at one point, I caught his eye across like 100 people, a couple hundred people, and he knew I looked at him. So afterwards, he broke into confession. He goes, I know I broke your rule, but I was texting somebody in France to say she was very funny. So am I forgiven? So I was like, okay, for that you are. But it's that moment of saying, look, my words mean something. Oh, yeah, I've had a lot of funny experience. You can't be with humans and not have a lot of things to learn from every time you're in the same room with them.
And I think I was sharing with you earlier, and it's again a segue about a blog that I put together about misunderstanding, and misunderstanding gets thrown around quite a bit, almost as much as active listening, as an excuse. Oh, it's just a misunderstanding. Well, in my world, and I think in your world as well, that becomes the excuse that I really didn't ask enough questions to fully understand, right?
I have a better way, and this is from a Learned It in Queens Tell It Like It Is girl and raised by that. We can be lazy. Let's own this word again. Lazy about checking in and making a little more effort. I had another situation where I got some interaction on emails and texts, and I was getting concerned about how this person was receiving what I was doing and talking. You know what cured it? A short conversation where I had back and forth and saying, this is what was my reasoning, this is what I was doing. And that person was in total agreement, but she didn't realize that those 2 or 3 sentences she shot out was pause for concern, and I was chewing on it. So kind of warmed up, asked for 15 minutes of
Yeah.
time, and said, good news, tough news, whatever she wanted to say. I would rather hear the tone, the pause, and the context. We can get a lot more done and move on. And what came away from that, she was appreciative, she was aware, she realized she had been I had that's not even a good word, misreceived or something. I hadn't received a couple of things correctly. That was not her original intent, but it smoothed over what would have been something that would have been weighing on me. So I've come after this work saying, oh, I'm perfect. You know, I come out of saying, look, we're all learning every day. We're all human. We have things that trigger. We have pre-conversations that we carry with us. And we carry into this conversation or another one. We have to test and retest. We have to work a little harder to improve ourselves every day. It's not a constant. You're not one and done. You say, oh, I did it really well yesterday. Well, guess what? New day, new people. Do
Yeah.
over. Try again.
And that's why you're the communications catalyst.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But a wealth of things can happen from when we take a risk and we're curious and we reach out. And one of it, funny enough, ended up in a book because I was on another call for my workbook and I saw a person across the world in Australia who looked interesting. So sometimes taking that extra bit of time to reach out and talk to somebody. And then the happy input is when she was in New York, I met her in person and then was invited to be in a book anthology that you'll have in the meeting notes, or what do you call it? The session notes. And it ended up being a global collaboration of women giving compelling stories of resilience and challenge and change. And then my part was a little bit of a backstory with a colleague, and then the art of storytelling, so they can also pass on. But I think that bravery of showing up and sharing your story and telling the truth in a way that your audience is ready to receive it. So not every story fits every situation. Gives people permission to take some chances.
Yeah, yeah. And that requires a certain level of vulnerability, openness, right? And I'm gonna introduce another word in here that gets thrown around quite a lot, and that is don't micromanage me. It's not a word, but it's a phrase, right? And I think that that's another one of those things that gets thrown around because people aren't spending enough time communicating, listening, exploring, understanding what's required so that there isn't the need for someone to constantly intervene and interject and so forth. So there is just so many elements, I guess, to this conversation that it goes beyond just the word listening. It impacts so many things.
Well, think about, we share a background that we approach different ways. You had the science background, and in one of your many businesses that you started was recruiting. It was finding talent, listening to them, and then figuring out where they would best be suited and where they are the appropriate fit. And so did I. And that is where my story work came about. Like everything else I do, I reverse engineered it. I was using stories and metaphors in my meetings to share things about me to get people to relax. And then they would be shocked that I would be telling some epic fail as an example of something they could share. And then they would give a little bit more than their rehearsed robotic, oh, I work too hard. That's what I need to improve on question. I talked about failing as a manager and making really bad hires in my first job in retail because I was so desperate to go home when I was in retail. I thought anyone with a pulse was good for 2 hours, and I learned a horrible lesson. And then hundreds and now thousands of people have now heard this story. But what it did is build trust. And then I learned a little bit more about them. But what was curious is before I knew the neuroscience, if I had somebody sharing something very true about themselves, it could be weeks after I met them that I sat down with the hiring manager. And then as soon as I read the keywords, I was back in the room. I was able to describe them in a very rich way and give context about what made a differentiating factor about why I was advocating for them, as opposed to looking at, let's say, I'm sorry, guys, but a boring MBA resume where it's everywhere like, I took economics, I took strategy, I took this, and you're like, okay. And so did everybody else. So how do you bring the essence of you to life? How do you make others understand, appreciate what really makes you tick and why you're valuable?
Yeah, yeah. And the hiring aspect of things, again, a huge example of the whole process of questions, answer, listening, and as we know from all the recruiting that you've done, and we've done lots in building AccuMatch and behavior intelligence, that was the catalyst for us starting that journey with a lot of clients. The big thing that constantly, and it still stands out, is candidates, when they don't ask questions, right, they don't demonstrate any interest and curiosity to figure out the job, right, or the environment or the culture. It's just a transaction, right?
All right, you're hitting something near and dear to my heart, because for years, when the beauty of the internet, more information was available. I mean, I'm just calling myself out. I grew up in the age you had to haul your body down to the library and stick your head in machines and go and dig and dig and dig in all these databases. So when somebody showed up to my office and they just read the website and didn't have any curiosity, showed any initiative, or made any hypotheses about where they thought the business was, or some obscure fact of what we did or what we were involved in, that didn't really sit well. So I just felt more they could have done. Just saying.
It goes from a half-hour interview to a 2-minute one. Thank you very much. See you later.
No, you always give people time. They're still customers and they're still out there. But still, it was like you missed an opportunity to dig further. And I know when I did it for myself in I may not have been the cookie cutter representation of what they needed, but use the metaphor, use the research, or use to tying things together. So yes, we have to do all the classic things when we're interfacing. So I'm not saying tell somebody a fable when they want a technical answer, but you have to think about what will have you separate yourself from the pack, stay memorable, and also be understood, which is your big word for today.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. As I reflect on our conversation today, I've just not just realized, but I know we've talked about this. It affects so many areas, just this one topic, right? It affects leadership, it affects collaboration, it affects culture, it affects hiring, right? So many areas. And yet there's also the element of the neuroscience that we've talked about, where some people, we work with a lot of international people and cultures are different, and I have to remind people that I'm still human. I cut my finger, I still bleed just like everybody else, but their culture may be so respectful that they don't explore things the way that they should. So we also need to take that into consideration sometimes too, right? We've got
Correct.
All of North America, even every part of the world, I think, has so many cultures intermingled together that we forget to ask or understand their background, right?
Don't call me. I have something to say. That is so on point, because listening in its best form is an act of respect and appreciation. The other thing, because I know from me, I'm influenced by my culture, the American culture. It's have a conversation, get it done, get to the point, move on. There is an art and a science when you want to build relationships of the circling back. Whether you circle back in your interaction, you're building on what I'm saying, you're coming back and reflecting. The circle back can happen in spoken word, in a conversation, in an email. I've been reflecting on what I learned from our conversation and want to say you gave me a lot to think about. So that is how you build a productive relationship. You're layering. It's not a one and done conversation. You meet somebody at an event, you all get your cards, and then you chit chat. What are you doing to build on that relationship? What are you doing with your staff when you walk through and have a weekly meeting? Are you following up and revisiting some of the comments in the learning? All of those are simple, free, cost friendly, another C word, things you can do that build trust, show empathy, understanding, interest. And that's how you build a relationship going forward. And then get people to actually call you back and maybe show up when you need them. So that's a little bit what I always feel really strongly about that doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah. That's actually a really critical, very, very, very important point, right? And that is the circling back. Without that circling back, you don't know whether someone's listened, right?
Mhm.
Okay. You don't know whether you've been understood, back to the understanding. And then people go off and things go off the rail and you go, what happened? Right?
Mhm. It's
And
true.
it's all because sometimes, and sometimes people are afraid that they might be wrong, so they don't circle back. And I've had that as well with a lot of people that I work with, even coaching clients. When I was running the coaching firm, you want them to feed back, but they don't want to be wrong, or their confidence level gets in the way. So we have to work harder, actually, as leaders and coaches to make sure that their comfort level and their openness, the environment allows them to be vulnerable enough to do that, right?
This is also very important because I've had, uh, just by luck, I think, a lot of introverted people who label themselves as introverts. And I have a lot of opinions about that. We're not all pure one way or the other introverts, but strong introverts who always bemoan that they don't think they have enough skills. They always start off by apologizing. And I think introverts are underutilized and undervalued in groups, because when having had very extroverted bosses who are chatting, and saying, this is what we're doing. Oh, do we have everybody's feedback and everything? The introvert is sitting at the corner, and I can see a few staff people in my mind's eye that were that person who have been taking all the information in, integrating it. And usually at the end of the meeting, they raise their hand and say, have we considered? And then suddenly we're taking a different path or realize we're not done.
Yeah, yeah.
By the same token, none of us make decisions right there in the meeting. We need to integrate and let it stew. So I know if it's life and death decision, you can't say, well, I want to get back to me tomorrow, what it should do. However, to give room for your staff and your people are reporting to give input afterwards in context, because a lot of things happen when we go to sleep and our brain is processing, as you know, because you are the expert on this. We spit out something out of our brain at 3 in the morning or at 8 in the morning. If we're lucky, our brain didn't wake us up with that idea. But to giving people a chance to ruminate is an art, and it's all, and reflect. So it can't be all noise all the time and words. So finding creative ways to prepare people for the discussions, how to be listened to, how to participate is a part of the process.
Yeah. That's a really big takeaway, something I've lived with and believed in all of my career is those quiet people are the ones that you need to make sure at the very end of every meeting or every discussion that you go, okay, what have you heard? What have you processed? I want your input because they are, while everybody else is talking, while you're talking, you're not really listening, right?
Mhm, mhm.
The-
It's a
the-
wonderful systemic way of processing information,
mm,
and, that's when we toss around a lot of words lately, diversity and diversity of thought is as important as any other diversity because you want to have people that do not think like you. I would test all my routines out on engineers when I had to do a training workshop because if or anything I was presenting informationally because or the lawyer group. I went to the other side of the continuum to see if
right,
I could do like a dry run. It was like playing off Broadway. Like went to another office of different tribes and saying, how is this going to land? What am I missing? And you're the richer for it. And also you're getting people's buy-in that you've taken their
yeah,
opinion and listening to them.
cool. Wow. Well, I think we've only really touched the surface on this, but
Mhm.
we're looking at the time. We could go on for another hour.
Yes.
I don't think it's fair to do that. So I was just thinking, this would be a good time to wrap up. What would you like to close with today?
I'd like to close with inviting people to interact with us. So you have things that have happened in your life. We'd love to hear about it and then explore how these different methodologies that we've shared, the AccuMatch that I got trained in with Nagui and the work that I do are complementary. One thing is not going to solve the challenge. I think the more robust and complementary the tools we have, they're better equipped. So share your stories, comment, and then reach out to us. And I'm always interested. I'm addicted to backstories of how somebody did something, how they made a change, and why it mattered. So feel free to also share some of your success stories when you weren't listening and then you woke up one day and thought, hmm, maybe I'll try
Mm,
something and be better.
yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
If I could add to that as well, be curious. Don't just take everything in as if it's gospel. We're all human, we're all writing books. I make mistakes, don't be curious, investigate it, research it, compare it to other things. But that's my style. I'm a researcher, I'm a bit of a scientist, as you know. So that's my style, and that's allowed me to layer a lot of things. So I would advise people to ask questions, be
Yes.
curious. Yeah.
And as Nike is saying in his very academic and terrific way, do your homework and then realize that we have more in common than we realize. We're all connected and we're usually one story or one example of something away from really building a trusting and improved relationship and build community. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Julian. I've put on the screen here, with your permission. I should have asked you first, but I think it's okay to do that. Your
Okay.
email, if people want to reach out to you, jryan@jryanpartners.com. Is that okay?
Yes, yes, and I'm on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn, and
Okay.
then, on a podcast, once a week on about leadership story talks.
Awesome.
Again, exploring how people engage and listen and use their stories and interact, but I'm always happy to show up in your neighborhood to give a talk or a speech or, get your people to get together and have some good conversations.
You've been amazing. Thank you so much, Julian. And
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Maggie.
yeah, have a great rest of your week, and look forward to seeing you on some more podcasts later on.
Cheers. Bye,
All right.
everyone. Thank you.
See ya.